stripping migrants of their legal rights.
You know, they want to hire now 5,000 more judges so that a person puts the toe on the land and we have to go to trial. This is crazy what we're doing. I don't want judges. I want Border Patrol. I want ICE.
All right, and if that was too subtle, the president making it clear in tweets today that he wants no hearings, no courts, and no due process. Let's get right into all of this and go straight to the front lines with NBC's Gabe Gutierrez, who is following breaking news for us this hour. Gabe, there has been some new information. I know that you have some new information on a migrant teen that was missing today from a shelter facility in Brownsville, Texas. What do we know more about that story? What can you tell us?
Hi there, Ayman. Well, it actually happened yesterday. Brownsville PD says they got a call around 4:30 yesterday afternoon that a young migrant boy, 15 years old, had run away from the shelter behind me, the Casa Padres shelter here, former Walmart, run by Southwest Key, a nonprofit group that runs this shelter. Now, that's according to Brownsville police. We got a statement from Southwest Key that as a licensed care center, if a child attempts to leave any of our facilities, we cannot restrain them. We're not a detention center. We talk to them and try to get them to stay. If they leave the property, we call law enforcement. Now, we also spoke with a source with direct knowledge of the incident, and he says that this 15-year-old boy literally ran out of this facility. Search crews were called in. It is now believed that this boy, according to the source of direct knowledge, he's believed to be in Mexico. There was a DNA test that was underway, some discrepancy in it. He was in the process, this source says, of being reunited with the man that he called his father, that was here in Texas, and now the boy is in Mexico, according to the source, en route back to Honduras. This does raise questions, however, of the security of these migrant children in these shelters. However, a source tells me that it's not unheard of that children run away from these shelters, but it's a very overall small percentage of the total number of cases. In the last fiscal year, according to this source, and in all Southwest Key shelters, which has thousands of children, 42 have run away, according to this source. But again, this 15-year-old migrant boy who ran away from this shelter is now believed to be in Mexico en route back to Honduras. Ayman.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez live in Brownsville, Texas for us. Thanks, Gabe. There are obviously several key legal issues that we want to focus on, and let's start with those right now. The president's call to send people back to their home countries without legal hearings. Can he actually do that? Deporting parents before they've been reunited with their children, is there any legal recourse to that? And will keeping families together by detaining children longer than is currently legal stand up in court? We begin that discussion with Assistant Federal Public Defender Eric Henshu, coming to us from El Paso, and MSNBC legal analyst Danny Savalas, who is live for us in McAllen, Texas. Great to have both of you gentlemen with us. Eric, if I may begin with you, you recently wrote an article for the Washington Post about your experience as you tried to navigate the system on behalf of your own clients. What kind of questions do you face from them, and what kind of resistance do you feel from the government as you try and get them some kind of legal representation?
Right, and so the backdrop to that is that my clients come to me, they've been appointed by a federal judge to represent them. They're being prosecuted for felony charges in federal criminal court. So they were just arrested, before I meet them in the field with their child. Their child's been taken from them, and they're now being held in federal custody pending their criminal case. So I meet them, and the typical questions before this zero tolerance and the taking away of children were questions about what's going to happen in my case. What are the charges against me? What amount of time am I looking at? The entire framework has changed now. You can imagine these parents don't care about their
How has it changed, Eric, if I may
case.
say? How has it changed, if I may say?
Yeah. They're a parent that's essentially had their child kidnapped from them. They want to know, where's my child? Who took my child? Where have they put my child? Is my child okay? When will I see my child? I mean, the basic questions any parent would want to know about their child.
President Trump tweeted earlier today, we can't let them invade our country, continuing that we must immediately, with no judges or court cases, bring them back from where they came. Danny, what is President Trump suggesting here? Is it even legally possible? Is deportation without due process a legal matter that can actually be undertaken? And what would that mean for asylum seekers? Or is this for everyone who crosses the border? I know I'm throwing a lot at you there, but I'm not sure I understand President Trump's tweet, who he's going after. So what is your legal analysis of that tweet?
Removal proceedings are not subject to the full range of constitutional protections, but illegal aliens do have a Fifth Amendment due process right in removal proceedings. Unfortunately, practically speaking, that due process right really, a court will only grant a petition if the alien had no opportunity whatsoever to present his or her case. And so that's a very high bar to meet. When it comes to the termination of parental rights, that's a 14th Amendment due process requirement, and aliens are entitled to that constitutional protection just as are citizens. But what that practically means in these termination proceedings is that the state needs to show only clear and convincing evidence that the parent has either abandoned or neglected the child. And no parent who is removed to Mexico or some other country can realistically attend court or even participate meaningfully in a reunification plan, which is why this probably happens more often than is reported. And by that I mean parents' rights being terminated and children being adopted out.
Eric, I'm sure you heard our own Gabe Gutierrez reporting just a short bit ago about this incident where a 15-year-old boy ran away from a shelter in Brownsville, Texas. He's believed to be in Mexico trying to make his way back to Central America. The response from the company running that facility has been that they are not a prison and kids are actually free to leave. How does that complicate attempts to reunite kids and their parents? And realistically speaking, why are we not seeing more kids take the initiative of leaving these facilities to try to find their parents?
Well, I think one of the scary parts of this is, for example, I have clients that are ages as young as 4 years old. And I think it actually gets back to the point of these aren't even teenagers or young people. These are young children that may not be running away from these facilities. And the bigger problem, frankly, is not as much of them running away, but of our parents not knowing where they are to start with. I mean, that has been the beginning and end of the problem as we see it from our clients, is we call ORR and we get told, well, the child is safe somewhere in the United States. If we're lucky, we'll find out that the child's in a particular city, but we're not given an address, a phone number, let alone the ability to communicate between parent and child.
Eric,
so I think yes.
I wanted to ask you really quickly, are you representing any families right now that are separated as a result of this zero tolerance policy?
Yes, I am. Right now, I have almost 6 clients who have had their children taken. And these are clients, remember.
Sorry, I was just going to say, and without getting into details, though, how many of those have you been able to relocate the parent or relocate the children, or do they know where each other are, but not necessarily connected?
Well, and this is the tragedy of the zero tolerance. So zero tolerance, what that is the criminal prosecution of individuals that are being apprehended at the border. That is how this crisis has started. So my clients are actually in federal criminal custody right now, and these are folks that have no prior criminal history. The worst thing that they may have done at all was having come here at some point in the past in the United States and been removed or deported from this country. So now they're being charged with illegal reentry. And that is how we see them. They're all in custody. Their cases are going on. Those cases could last upwards of 2 months while they're being criminally prosecuted per this zero tolerance policy. The damage is coming from arresting these parents in the field and taking their child and then continuing to prosecute folks for federal felonies who their only crime is frankly fleeing a war-torn, violence-torn country to come here to a place that they thought would grant them, as Danny talked about earlier, these legal proceedings, including applications for asylum and the stuff that our country has been built upon.
Right. There's so many questions we want to delve into, and for more on all of this, I want to bring in our panel. We have Dara Lind, a Vox senior reporter, and Mimi Rocah, former federal prosecutor. Great to have both of you guys join the conversation as well. Dara, if I can begin with you. I know that you've written extensively about the administration's response to the border crisis. The president signing an executive order this week claiming it will end family separation. Can you explain to us what that order actually does?
It's not clear that the administration has agreed on what the order actually does yet. We've actually heard that most of the agencies responsible for implementing it have been kind of passing off blame to each other. What it did was open the door for families not to have to be separated by saying that parents could be prosecuted but remain in the custody of the Department of Homeland Security. DHS doesn't appear to be clear on how that's going to work yet, and their response has been, so far, to refer fewer parents for prosecution to begin with.
Mimi, I know that while the president was signing the executive order, he himself acknowledged that there could be some legal challenges. Take a listen to this soundbite.
There may be some litigation. We're also wanting to go through Congress. We will be going through Congress. And ultimately, we want to see it done right. And it will be done right.
So what are some of the legal challenges that we could see arise of this executive order? I mean, one of the points that just jumped out at me was hearing Eric there talk about the fact that he knows where the parents are. They're going through criminal proceedings, and their kids now are not going to be reunited with them in prison or in the process of these court hearings over the course of the next several weeks or months.
Right. Well, I mean, the legal challenge is that there's a class settlement in place that says that the government cannot keep these children in custody, which is where the parents who are being criminally prosecuted are, for more than 20 days.
Right.
And so the government would have the federal government would have to get out from under that in order to be able to not separate, which is what the president is, I guess, saying now, although nothing's been totally clear. So really, this all comes back to why this problem originated in the first place, which is the president's, this administration's adoption of this zero tolerance policy, meaning we're going to prosecute everyone who comes into the country, no matter what the circumstances. And I just want to make clear that the laws that they're trying to enforce now have always existed. They've existed, you know, in federal statute under prior Democratic and Republican administrations. The prior administrations chose not to enforce them because it wasn't, frankly, worth enforcing them. Aside from being a humanitarian issue, there are, frankly, more important criminal laws that we need to be spending resources on, not this. The immigration laws that were being enforced were ones that focused on people who were re-entering the country after having been deported, after having committed certain kinds of serious felonies. Those are the immigration crime, you know, if we're looking at the criminal side of it, that other administrations have focused on.
And to prosecute.
And to prosecute. This is a waste of resources.
Darren, I know that you've taken a look at the statistics from U.S. Customs and Border Protection illegal crossings over the years. They're actually down recently. During former President Obama's migrant crisis, there were more than 420,000 crossings last year. It was about 310,000, so it drops significantly, I would say. I know that you've compared the two policies so far. In an article you wrote, Obama was faced with a genuine increase in children and families coming into the U.S. Trump just decided that typical numbers were now unacceptable. Take us through your analysis between the two presidents and how they dealt with their respective crises.
Sure. So it's worth noting that the Trump administration is framing this as a crisis because they're comparing this year's numbers to last year's. When Trump came into office, there really was an anomalously low number of border crossings, and that began to creep up again toward the end of last year. So the Trump administration, which had been praising itself for having solved the border issue, now found itself freaking out that these things hadn't lasted. But under the Obama administration, the approach that they took to what was, again, a genuine surge was mostly punitive. They were trying very hard to keep families in detention for as long as it took for them to prosecute their cases. They were trying to really ship families through the process quickly rather than giving them time to pursue their asylum claims. Where that ended up was that they got a court ruling that they could not hold children for more than 20 days. This court settlement was interpreted so that children, even with their parents, couldn't be held in custody for that long. So Trump is now trying to kind of get to the point where Obama was by asking for this court settlement to be reinterpreted.
All right, guys, unfortunately, we're running out of time. We can spend a whole hour talking about this, and we're certainly going to delve into it from a few different perspectives as well. Eric Henshu, Danny Savalas, Darren Lynn, and Mimi Rocah, appreciate your time this Sunday afternoon. Still ahead, the whole world was watching this week as the Trump administration separated mothers and children at the border. We're going to look at how the international media covered the story. Stay with us. Continued calls for action on immigration today. Today, protesters in Tornillo, Texas, where the federal government is currently housing migrant children in tents, has taken place. And in Florida, more than 1,000 migrant children are being housed in a shelter in Homestead. NBC's Mariana Tencio is live for us there. Mariana, good to have you with us. Describe for us what is going on where you are.
Eamon, all is calm today, but yesterday there were hundreds of people like the ones we are seeing in Texas protesting in front of this facility where we know more than 70 children have been separated from their families. They were rallying against the zero tolerance policy, and there were also undocumented people out here. The outrage growing in this community. I spoke to one little girl. She was here with her 4 siblings. Her mom is undocumented, was marching by her side. This is why she told me it was important for her to be out here.
Why are you out here today?
Because my father, he was deported, and I feel that fear and pain of being separated again from my mom, because she's very hardworking, and I know that the children in there have hardworking parents too, and then they want to be with them because they feel complete with them, just like every family should.
Imagine a child, Eamon, who is the daughter of undocumented immigrants, watching these images of children who are nowhere to be found, separated, torn apart from their parents. They were also out here protesting the image, they say, that this administration is putting out of immigrants, of families like your family, your parents who were immigrants as well, portrayed as an infestation and as people who are coming over to this country invading it. Eamon?
Yeah, absolutely heartbreaking. And then on top of that, to see the debate being politicized is even more heartbreaking. Mariana Tencio live in Florida for us this afternoon. Thank you, Mariana. Well, the U.S. isn't the only country that is dealing with an immigration crisis. So how are other countries dealing with their influx of immigrants? And what happens to the children in other countries? Plus, stumping on immigration despite the backlash of separating families at the border. The president thinks it's a winning platform for the upcoming midterms. Could it backfire on Republicans? We're going to discuss that as well. All right, time now for We Said, They Said. And tonight, the world watched with shock and outrage as children were ripped apart from their parents and held in cages. Their cries, absolutely heartbreaking. The Trump administration coming under intense criticism for its harsh family separation policy.
Very important issue that he's raised of what we have seen in the United States. The pictures of children being held in what appear to be cages are deeply disturbing. This is wrong. This is not something that we agree with. This is not the United Kingdom's approach.
What's going on in the United States is wrong. I can't imagine what the families living through this are enduring. Obviously, this is not the way we do things in Canada.
All right, so from friends to foes, even the supreme leader of Iran tweeting his disapproval. Ayatollah Khamenei saying, how can they commit such a crime separating children from mothers for a cruel policy? Even far-right anti-immigration French politician Marine Le Pen decided to wade into the controversy, telling the French press, I am opposed to a procedure that separates parents and children. A headline in Spain's liberal broadsheet El País roughly translates to the anti-immigrant rage of Donald Trump tramples the fragile balance of the border, leading many to ask,
Donald Trump must have known this kind of reaction would come.
What's so astonishing about Donald Trump is that he simply doesn't care.
All right, not a good look for the U.S. And so President Trump backed down from a decision his administration implemented in the first place.
Where does this leave the children? I mean, there are, 2,000 plus children who have been separated from their parents already. Do we know what's going to happen to them now?
All right, so it seems even the White House doesn't know exactly how to reunite kids with their parents. And on Thursday, instead of focusing on the young detainees, it was the First Lady's unlikely fashion choice that had the world's media buzzing.
The First Lady, Melania Trump, has been visiting one of these migrant shelters, trying to defuse some tensions amidst the world's outcry there regarding the detention of children. And it's what she wore, rather than what she said, that seems to have captured everyone's imagination.
Political cartoonists also taking aim. This one shows FLOTUS covering the face of a migrant child with "Be Worst" emblazoned across her jacket, a jab at Melania's "Be Best" campaign. Facing a firestorm of criticism at home, Trump lashed out at his ally Germany, misrepresenting crime statistics in that country to make the case against taking in asylum seekers. Trump tweeting out, crime in Germany is up 10% since migrants were accepted. The problem with that statement is it's actually not true, and one that didn't sit well, as you can imagine, with German media. The conservative daily Bild running this headline, Trump tweeting wrong numbers put forward against Merkel. An op-ed appearing in Deutsche Welle reads, the attacks against the German government are more than just rude, they are imprudent. President Trump followed up his attack on Germany with yet another tweet, this time targeting the entire European Union, saying, we don't want what is happening with immigration in Europe to happen with us. So, what exactly is happening in Europe? Since 2015, the continent has been trying to manage a relentless flow of more than 1 million people crossing into its borders, mostly fleeing wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. That's proved particularly challenging for some governments as they struggle to cope with that influx. It's also created tension among EU countries. Germany's open door policy is now looking to threaten the coalition government's very existence, while countries like Hungary have taken a more hardline stance on immigration. Building a fence around its perimeter, the country's parliament recently passed a law making it illegal to help undocumented migrants. And just this month, Italy refused to take in refugees making the treacherous journey across the Mediterranean, not once, but twice. All of this coming to a head as leaders from more than a dozen EU countries met earlier today in Brussels to hash out a joint response to the bloc's refugee crisis. I want to bring in to the conversation Olga Byrne, Director of Immigration with the International Rescue Committee, and Masha Gessen, staff writer for The New York. It's great to have both of you with us. Olga, let me begin with you. Explain to us, first of all, because the perception that we get from at least American politicians, I should be very specific, the American president, is that those coming across the southern border in the United States, as he has said in the past, are rapists, gang members, criminals, the worst of the worst. Give us the actual context of the types of people that we are seeing both coming into Europe and here into the United States, generally.
Sure. Well, at the U.S. southern border right now, we're seeing the majority of people coming from 3 countries in Central America, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. They are 3 of the most dangerous and violent countries in the world. El Salvador and Honduras consistently top the list of top homicide rates outside of an open war zone. So we're seeing particularly families, mothers, children, unaccompanied children coming to the U.S. seeking protection.
And what are we seeing in Europe from those that are trying to make their way into Europe?
Well, in Europe, obviously, we're seeing large numbers of people coming from Syria as that war is ongoing, as well as Afghanistan, people from various parts of Africa, from Nigeria fleeing Boko Haram.
Yeah, because we get a sense that in Europe, at least, they're portraying them as like terrorists that are coming in. They're going to change our way of life in Europe and what have you. Masha, I want to ask you, according to the UNHCR, the number of migrants arriving in Europe I see is actually on the decline. What's at the heart of how the European Union is struggling to deal with this issue? What is the debate?
I'm sorry, that's really not my area of expertise. I'm happy to talk about what's happening in this country. And, you know, but I just want to respond to your first question, which is that we get trapped in talking about who these people are.
Yeah.
Right? Because Donald Trump is making such outrageous statements about people coming into this country and portraying them as criminals, as animals, as people who infest this country. It shouldn't be a question of who these people are. It should be a question of America's international obligations and of what immigration and asylum law is actually intended to do, which is to protect people from persecution, regardless of who they are. They're human.
So let me then focus on that point really quickly, and we can come back to the European Union for a second. But given President Trump's tweets today about wanting to kind of eliminate due process for those that you were talking about right now, the chances of that happening, the chances of the president eliminating due process, do you think that is likely to happen in this country given the current climate?
I think we have been observing this happening over the last year and a half. I would go further and say that actually we have been observing it happening in the area of immigration for much, much longer than that. And what Donald Trump has done is just exacerbated greatly a process of eroding immigration norms and immigration process that has been underway since the 90s.
So, Olga, to that question about the European Union and the rift that is happening with some countries, even internally with some of the politicians there between, you know, the hard right and those perhaps that are adopting more of a liberal policy, are you seeing any parallels between the European Union and its migration crisis and what we're seeing here in the United States?
I mean, I think what I can best say in terms of what we're seeing here in the United States is a real erosion of both due process and access to protection. So, for example, before the zero tolerance policy was announced by the Attorney General, the administration had already removed some legal avenues for children to come to the United States. It ended the Central American Minors Program, which had been started under the Obama administration, which allowed some children to apply in their own countries, in El Salvador or Honduras or Guatemala, to come into the U.S. as refugees. Soon after the zero tolerance policy was announced, the administration cut off funding for legal representation for some unaccompanied children. So we know that having a lawyer is incredibly important in terms of how you're able to navigate the process.
Right. It certainly seems that it's not a fair process. I mean, how would you describe the process right now?
Right now, I would say that it's, you know, for many people experiencing it, no, they're not experiencing a fair process. They're either held in indefinite detention, where they can't access, you know, they can't speak to people. Their mental health is going to deteriorate. They have in detention a 14% chance of getting a lawyer to help them, you know, through their immigration case.
Right. And Masha, I want to quote you something that you wrote recently in the article you had. The Trump administration's tough immigration policies are, in fact, sending a message to parents looking to seek asylum. The government, you wrote, has unleashed terror on immigrants. Are the policies proving to be a deterrent? Because it seems what the argument that the administration is making is this is meant to be a deterrent for parents bringing their kids illegally across the country.
I'm going to object to your question again. You know, first of all, it's too early to say whether it's acting as a deterrent. Yeah. But, you know, the fact that we're, again, evaluating that policy exactly the way that Trump would like it evaluated, which is this absolutely inhumane, cruel, you know, cruel on the face of it, blatantly cruel, intentionally cruel policy, having the desired effect, is the wrong question. Whether, I mean, it could be 100% effective, it could be instantly effective, and it would still be profoundly wrong.
No, fair enough. I mean, I understand your valid criticism, but they're making this argument to the American people. You know, Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, and the President are coming out and saying, you know, this is zero tolerance policy because they want it to be a deterrent. And I understand that you're saying that is a cruel policy, and a lot of people agree with you that it is a cruel policy. But the question is it an effective policy? And
no, I don't think that's the question. I do not think that is a morally sound question. I think it is immoral to even ask the question.
Immoral to ask the question.
It is immoral to ask the question.
No, fair enough. And we're going to see whether or not I mean, obviously there's going to be some legal challenges to this, and the President, given the pressure that they have faced, has obviously rescinded that. The executive order itself, do you feel that is an actual rescinding of the policy of separating families?
It appears to be a rescinding of the policy. I think that we have to be aware of just how much the existence of the policy for the period that it existed not only did harm to people, but also moved the debate.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that we're sitting here talking about this is one example of how much the debate has moved to the right just in the last couple of months.
Yeah. All right. There's obviously a lot of questions that we have to ask as well. Thank you very much, Masha Gessen and Olga Byrne. Appreciate your time. Coming up, doing Israel's bidding, Jared Kushner in the Middle East as he gets ready to unveil a peace plan that's unlikely to make Palestinian leaders happy. This as the Trump administration pulls out of the Human Rights Council over what it claims is anti-Israel bias. We're going to look at that issue next. And another international note before we go to break. Turkey's incumbent president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, claiming victory tonight, securing a presidency with even more sweeping powers for the Turkish strongman. Another candidate is contesting the results, accusing the country's state-run news agency of manipulation.
SNBC.
President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, back in the Middle East and working on a peace proposal for Israel and Palestine. He spent this week meeting with leaders from Israel, Jordan, Qatar, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. But he failed to meet with Palestinian leaders who have kept up a boycott on talks since the U.S. announced its embassy in Jerusalem. In an interview with a Palestinian newspaper, Kushner said that he'd release his proposal, quote, soon, and downplayed the need for support from the Palestinians at all. And it's official, the U.S. is no longer a member of the UN Human Rights Watchdog Group. Take a listen.
The United States is officially withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council, the hypocritical and self-serving organization that makes a mockery of human rights.
All right, so that was U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. She gave two central reasons for the departure, accusing the Council of bias against Israel and allowing countries with human rights violations to remain as members. Let's talk about all of this with Andrea Prasow, Deputy Washington Director at Human Rights Watch, and Steve Clemons, Washington Editor-at-Large for The Atlantic. It's great to have both of you with us. Let me start with this Nikki Haley letter to Amnesty International and other organizations, Andrea. She wrote in this threatening letter, I may say, accusing Amnesty International of encouraging other member countries to oppose a U.S. drafted resolution for council reforms. Haley said members were near unanimous that the reforms were needed. Let me begin by asking you, is the U.S. justified in leaving the council for the reasons that Nikki Haley cited?
Well, the U.S. can do whatever it wants, of course, but the decision to leave the Human Rights Council is consistent with this administration's approach to multilateral institutions in general, which is that if it doesn't get its way, it's going to pack up its toys and go home. The Human Rights Council is a flawed institution. Most institutions are. But instead of sticking with it and really trying to work hard at reforms where they could achieve consensus and allow the Council to continue to make some sort of progress in the human rights field, the U.S. just chose to withdraw entirely.
So what is it that the United States wanted that the Human Rights Council was unable to deliver, or I should say the other member states were unable to deliver in terms of reforms?
Well, its principal complaint is that there's a specific agenda item focused on Israel's occupation of Palestine. And it argues that there's disproportionate attention given to the state of Israel. Now, it's true that that's the only country that has its own agenda item, and it's also true that that could be changed. But that doesn't seem like a good reason to leave the council entirely. The U.S. has supported really important initiatives at the Human Rights Council, such as the Commission of Inquiry on North Korea. I mean, that's a process that exposed really for the first time to the world how serious the human rights violations were in North Korea. By refusing to participate, the U.S. no longer has any say in what decisions are made by the Council, what commissions of inquiry go forward, whether investigations will occur in the gross human rights abuses that are occurring around the world.
So, Steve, to that point that Andrea was talking about Israel and the fact that it is a single, perhaps it's the only out of the 7 agenda items, the only country, and the issue of the occupation that is brought up there, because Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has also said that the Council has adopted more resolutions condemning Israel than against the rest of the world combined. Does he have an argument that the UN Human Rights Council is biased in the fact that it has this singular agenda item on Israel and the occupation of Arab lands?
I don't feel so, because even the United States has taken positions that have raised serious questions in the past about Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory. The question, this is an undone item in the United Nations. It remains an undone item. I assume we're going to get to Jared Kushner and Greenblatt and what they're going to try to pull out and what they're calling perhaps the deal of the century. But I think right now we have to understand that there are many other agenda items, and certainly Israel comes up a lot. What I find very disappointing about American leadership in the Human Rights Council is that we haven't put forward anything. We've talked about North Korea, but there are human rights problems all over the world. But remember, this administration is one that said when Rex Tillerson was Secretary of State, it would not be guided by human rights concerns. We have Donald Trump meeting people like Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines or Kim Jong-un of North Korea and not raising human rights at all. So to some degree, withdrawing from this, while I lament it, actually makes ever more clear the pugnacious nationalism and disregard for international institutions and improving the international order and the role the United States has traditionally played. So it just makes it more clear that the United States is not in that business right now.
You brought up the issue of the peace process or the peace plan that the Kushner-Greenblatt team may be putting forward. And I wanted to get your thoughts. Is it possible that Jared Kushner can put forth a genuine peace plan with not having spoken to the Palestinians over the past several months? Yes, the Palestinians have boycotted given the controversy surrounding the Jerusalem decision. But is any peace plan, Steve, from your analysis, likely to be dead on arrival if it does not include the Palestinians up front?
Eamon, you and I have been at this peace game watching business for a very long time, for years and years and years. And I just don't see a formula where Jared Kushner can roll out a plan that may even have implicit support perhaps behind the scenes from the Saudis and others, but without consulting with the Palestinians. To come out with conditions that make the Palestinians victims yet again of something imposed upon them, I think is a recipe for failure, more violence, and real problems in the region. And I think, you know, what we're seeing is, because of the decision to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem in part, is that a significant part of the Arab world no longer looks at the United States as a fair and objective broker in this process. It looks at it as one-sided. And so given that, it's unlikely, and that's why the Palestinians won't meet with our negotiators, but at the same time, it makes it nearly impossible for the U.S. just simply to impose a deal.
Yeah, valid points there, Steve Clemons. There's certainly a lot of questions as to whether or not it's going to have any traction. Steve, Andrea Prastow, thank you both very much. And coming up, is this a winning strategy? President Trump believes his recent immigration moves will only help Republicans in the midterms. Could separating children from their parents actually be positive politically for the GOP?
Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they just want to use the issue, and I like the issue for election too. Our issue is strong borders, no crime. Their issue is open borders. Let MS-13 all over our country. That's what's going to happen if you listen to them. I got elected largely because we are strong on the border.
All right, so President Trump, they're escalating his attacks against Democrats at the Nevada GOP convention yesterday while suggesting immigration is a winning issue for his party. Joining me now, Justin Miller, Daily Beast national editor, Wadi Gaitan, the Libre Initiative, national press secretary and former communications director for the Florida GOP, and Raul Reyes, attorney and NBCNews.com contributor. Great to have you gentlemen with us this Sunday afternoon. Wadi, let me begin with you, if I may. How does this issue play to the base of the GOP if, in fact, this policy continues the separation of families and the issue of immigration at large?
Yeah, and it depends what state you're looking at. So if you look at states like Florida, where there's a very large Hispanic community, but in the I-4 corridor it's mostly Puerto Ricans, and then in South Florida you have Cubans. So immigration is not such a big issue. So he's actually talking to a group there that does want their candidates to be hard on crime and strong at the border. That's why you've seen people like Governor Rick Scott, who's running for Senate, be vocal on this issue, but at the same time not calling for separation of families.
So to that point, Raul, and I want to put up this Quinnipiac poll for you, where it says 27% of voters support the separation of families at the border. We assume that means the remaining balance, 66% actually oppose it. This was from June 14th and 17th, so it's very recent. Will Democrats use immigration as a weapon in the midterm elections? Right. Is that an effective strategy for Democrats to campaign on, given what we're seeing in terms of
I think that has changed drastically in the last, say, 10 days, because immigration has been a highly effective wedge issue for the Republicans, especially with the base. But now this story has really shocked the country. It certainly has resonated with Latinos that now this is something that Democrats can win on. And we see this in the Pew poll that's out that's showing for the first time recently the #1 issue for Democrats, which is typically economy or healthcare, is now immigration. That's what we've typically seen with Republicans. And couple that with, Republicans, this president among Latinos has 69% negative. With African Americans, it's 86%. So that gives them an opening in certain districts with large Latino populations, including Florida, as you mentioned, to try and exploit the president's vulnerability. And in Florida, especially, there are many Puerto Ricans who are unhappy, in addition to immigration, with his handling of the hurricane.
Justin, you published an article on Wednesday highlighting how the president signed the executive order that would essentially not separate families after initially establishing the zero tolerance policy, which separated families. How would you say this week has gone for the president, given the fact that he said at first he couldn't do it, it wasn't in his hands, he tried to kind of pin it to the Democrats, that didn't work, we saw the backlash, and then he rescinded it with an executive order?
Well, I think it's been an awful week, right? The president, for the first time really in his administration, has finally backed down from something. I think once that was because the public got behind or got against him, really, and also, more importantly, really rare, the Republican Congress did too. He wanted this policy to be cruel, quite frankly, because it would be a deterrent. Yeah. And now it's that part of it at least is gone, but not the whole thing, certainly. This machine that is locking people up and prosecuting them is not slowing down.
Do you get a sense that it could come back and haunt the GOP in the midterms the way, the way the president has handled it? Or are there members of the GOP who could say, like what we saw in South Carolina against Mark Sanford, that, hey, you know what, this is the party of Donald Trump. You either get on his party platform or get out of the way?
Well, I think it will have two different effects, right? In the primaries, insofar as there still are, people are going to run towards Trump pro breaking up the families, pro arresting people. In states like Nevada, where Dean Heller was with President Trump, this has got to be a horrible issue for him. This state is 30% Hispanic. It was won by Hillary Clinton in 2016. He does not want this headache. And that could cost him, or it could cost the party, rather, a Senate seat.
Raul, really quickly, do you think that Congress is likely to actually do something on immigration this week, try to pass a bill given the fact? That was quicker. That was quicker than I expected.
Have an unreliable negotiator in the White House. There's so much confusion over it. They cannot control the caucus, and meanwhile we have this chaotic immigration, family separation policy going on. And remember, he issued the executive order, which is really more like a memo. It doesn't necessarily end that family separation process. It directs the Attorney General to try and change it to more to family detention. So too many variables, I think, in there.
Waddy, let me play you this soundbite. This is from Ted Lieu, Representative Ted Lieu on the House floor. Take a listen to this.
The gentleman will suspend.
For what reason, Madam Speaker?
The gentleman is in breach of quorum.
Cite the rule, Madam Speaker.
Rule 17 of the House
There's
that
no
prohibits
rule that says I
Rule
can't play
17.
sounds.
The gentleman will suspend.
Why are you trying to prevent the American people
Rule
from listening to what it
17
sounds
of
like
the
in a
House
detention
prohibits
facility?
the use
These are
of that
babies and
device.
kids in a detention
Waddy, are you
facility.
worried
Why
that Democrats use moments like this? Obviously, it's a powerful moment. Some are saying it was theatrical, but it was nonetheless a very powerful moment to hear that audio recording that I think everyone pretty much in the country has heard. Are we likely to see Democrats use moments like this and this debate to flip seats in November?
They will. They're going to use this audio and they're going to use pictures. But what you're going to see, the GOP, is they're going to try to take action and say how they can actually do both. They're going to try to make the case on how they can actually be strong on border security, but at the same time treat people humanely. You mentioned Senator Dean Heller. He was at the event with President Trump, but just earlier this week, he was one of the original 13 members who called on the administration to stop separating families. So you're going to see that they're going to try to make the case how they can do both.
Yeah, there's certainly some Republicans who are critical the president will be able to play that card as well. Waddy, Guy Ten, Justin Miller, Raul Reyes, great to have all of you guys with us this Sunday afternoon. That'll do it for this week. Join me back here next Sunday at 5 p.m. to break down the major stories of the week. Of course, you can reach out to me on social media and be sure to join Casey Hunt at 7 p.m.